are 30 minutes into the U.S. trading day on this Friday, March 22nd. Here are the top stories we're following. A rough day for retail. You have shares of Lululemon and Nike plunging this morning after a weak showing on the earnings stage, with both companies delivering cautious outlooks. Meanwhile, a banner day for social media platform Reddit, which surged nearly 50% in its trading debut on Thursday. We'll recap the action and discuss where the stock goes next. And finally, checking in on the C-suite, Simon Freakley, CEO of global consulting firm Alex Partners. He joins in just a bit to discuss what's weighing on the hearts and minds of chief executives. I'm Katie Greifeld in New York. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. You take a look at markets on this Friday, and it's pretty quiet behind me, but it is a down day so far. Of course, you take a look at the S&P 500, currently off less than 0.1%. I think we can go ahead and call that unchanged. It's a little bit more dramatic, of course, if you take a look at big tech, with the Nasdaq 100 currently off by about 0.1%. And I threw the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index on there just for fun, and it's pretty much the same story, of course, down by about 0.1%. So pretty quiet on the index level, but you do have athleisure brands breaking a sweat over the strength of the consumer. Nike and Lululemon both anticipating challenges in the U.S. market. You've Nike warning investors that sales will take a hit this year, with pressure particularly in the sneaker department. Meanwhile, Lululemon seeing a sales slowdown to start the year thanks to lower foot traffic and, of course, shopper pullback. Poonam Goyal of Bloomberg Intelligence joins us now, and I want to start with Lululemon because we are looking at a titanic move in the shares. Give us some perspective here. Was it really that bad? Is growing for Nike. You have the likes of Hoka and some of these other sneaker brands really stepping up to the plate. I'm sure we're going to be having this conversation again soon. So our thanks to Poonam Goyal of Bloomberg Intelligence. Let's broaden out and take a broader look at these equity markets. We have the perfect guest to do that because joining me now is Greg Bowdle. He is head of U.S. equity and derivative strategy over at BNP Paribas. Greg, happy Friday.
Likewise, thank you.
Let's talk about your year-end price target for the S&P 500. The last clocked in at 51.50. You take a look at the S&P 500 right now, we're trading about 100 points above that. So what happens next?
Yeah, I mean, really at the moment, it's just this story of continued...
Of course, Wall Street year-end targets for the S&P 500, and there's a lot of four handles still, which really speaks to just how quickly this market has moved. So maybe you're not anticipating a correction, but would you anticipate some sort of pullback, just given the valuations, that maybe we take a breather at some point? In just a bit, but let's talk a little bit more about the Magnificent Seven, because that's really all we do. You mentioned that we have seen some dispersion in that grouping. I mean, you have Apple, Tesla kind of fallen out of bed this year. If I were an optimist, couldn't I say that that's a healthy thing to suggest that correlations aren't just at one across the board? That you have valuations really kind of putting a restraint on the market. You think about this big falling out of bed again, that we're talking about the names of Tesla, for example. How much is that going to restrain the market when you think about just the heft of some of these companies that we're talking about to individuals? Greg, hang tight for just a couple of minutes. We want to take a quick look at what's moving underneath these markets. We're going to do that now with Bloomberg's Jess Menton. And Jess, tell me about what's going on with FedEx.
Well, that
question, because we're not talking about gigantic IPOs here, but as a measure of sentiment, very important. Bloomberg's Jess Menton, thank you so much. And coming up, speaking of, we're going to talk about Reddit because it's paring gains a little bit right now, but that's after it soared 48% in its trading debut. We'll have the latest. This is Bloomberg. Well, let's check in on shares of Reddit because, of course, they're falling a bit today, but that's after or worse. It's pretty hard to forget. But Amy, I know you've had a very busy week. Really appreciate your reporting. Our thanks, of course, to Bloomberg's Amy Orr. Now, still with us, we have Greg Bowdle. He is head of U.S. equity and derivative strategy over at BNP Paribas. So, of course, when it comes to talking about Reddit, the conversation that I keep having is that this is great news for the pipeline. All of those IPO candidates waiting to see how the market receives, of course, some of these IPOs. But you take kind of the other side of that. Of course, a life-shattering revelation. It's a good counterpoint, of course, to what we're hearing. And I think when you mention all the exuberance that we have seen so far, I mean, you can just take a look at the chart of Bitcoin. I guess it's the more surprising thing is that we haven't seen the IPO window open up more meaningfully. Just a minute or so, because you and I were talking in the break about the concept of de-equitization, of course, the fact that you take a look at equity markets and they've actually been shrinking a bit. And what I've been trying to work out is that's a really interesting trend, but is that something that we need to care about? Big, beautiful balance sheet. But let's circle this conversation back to those mid-sized, those smaller companies that we were talking about before the break, because of course, in addition to Reddit's IPO, we had a Fed meeting this week. We got a dot plot, and the longer run median dot was raised to 2.6%. That's up marginally from 2.5%. If we are heading into this higher for longer environment, I know that in and of itself is a subject for debate. What does it mean for some of those smaller companies with shakier finances? Talking about a lot of these dynamics for a while, and the fact that you do have a lot of loss leaders in the Russell 2000, it feels like we haven't seen a really meaningful uptick in defaults and bankruptcies a little bit, but not, of course, anything that would cause a panic. When do those higher rates really start to crunch some of these corporations we're talking about? The meditation on what higher rates mean for big tech, because of course, one of the narratives out there was that when you have higher rates, interest rates rising, yields rising, that would really pressure big tech. Of BNP Paribas. Thank you so much. Now, still ahead, we're going to take a look at the companies making the most social buzz today, and that's our Social Climber segment up next. All right, it's time now for Social Climbers, a look at the stocks making waves on social media this morning. And first up, we have United Airlines. It's now letting people pool and share their frequent flyer points with family and friends. The carrier will allow groups of up to 5 Mileage Plus members to share and redeem miles from a joint account. It's a feature that's offered by some of the smaller carriers like JetBlue and also Air Canada. Next up, talk about fast food on the fly. Wendy's, it's delivering food by drone for the first time in Virginia. It's part of a collaboration between DoorDash and Alphabet's food delivery company called Wing. So Wing drones, they fly eligible items, including burgers, fries, and Frosties, at 65 miles an hour before gently, apparently, dropping them off on a customer's front lawn. The pilot service is said to expand to other U.S. cities before the end of the year. And finally, the demand for the diabetes drug Ozempic. It's causing a lot of stress for workers at the Danish drug maker Novo Nordisk. The CEO said that over 14% of workers reported stress symptoms last year, a figure that he says is too high. Now, work-life balance, it's a vital part of the culture over at Novo, with many of the employees going on vacation for the month of July. Meanwhile, the GLP drug, it's also said to be making news after reports of its impact on fertility. Some women reporting that they're pregnant, in most cases unintentionally, while taking weight loss medications such as Ozempic, despite being on birth control or dealing with infertility. So a lot to unpack there. Of course, you can follow all the latest company buzz on TREN Go on your Bloomberg terminal. Coming up, we're going to be speaking with... All right, it is day 2 of trading for Reddit, and you have shares of the social media darling. They surged on the first day of...
Be here.
Let's talk about the IPO market, because you had Reddit and you had Astera Labs out this week, and they weren't enormous IPOs, but the narrative that I keep hearing is that they're important as temperature checks, that you have basically the CEOs of other companies that are in the pipeline really seeing how they were received in terms of whether those companies then want to go public. Curious whether you're viewing it as that way and whether your clients are as well.
Well, one, what the licensing of data does to drive the commercial revenues of Reddit, but what it does to the sense of the Reddit community, that they feel that they're being watched and listened to as they train these models. So I think in the next few weeks, that'll settle down to a narrative, and we'll see.
I mean, it seems like the FTC shares a lot of those concerns on the part of Reddit users. And of course, as we progress and you have other companies try to tap into sort of the same AI craze and try to also license out their data, it seems like this is an issue that's going to become apparent for a lot of other companies as well.
I think that's...
Because, of course, not everyone can make chips. Not everyone can be NVIDIA, but it's these data-rich companies that, like you said, are going to be the treasure trove. So,
right.
I mean, when you're speaking to your clients, how are they sort of weighing those concerns? Data protection concerns, but also we don't want to get left behind here when it comes to AI.
But the opportunity for management teams is not the efficiency plays, which is talked about a lot, call centers and insight. The real opportunity is in growth, how to use the insight from data, how to use...
Here in general terms, how CEOs are feeling about AI, because I was speaking to a panel of 4 economists yesterday, and they were all very optimistic about about AI from a productivity standpoint. Of course, what that means for the labor market. If you talk to maybe some of the workers in the labor market, they wouldn't feel quite as optimistic. What is the mood music in the C-suite when it comes to AI? Is it an opportunity or is it a risk?
So it's so interesting, Katie. We do a survey. AI is at the center of their vision.
Well, my natural next question has to be, what was seen as the biggest challenge?
Well, interestingly enough, not just in the US, but globally,
Because, I mean, that feels like it's on the minds of everyone. And it's interesting, of course, we had a Fed meeting this week, a Fed decision in addition to the Reddit IPO. And this is something we were just talking about earlier in the program, that you take a look at the long run dot, it was raised to 2.6%. It seems like higher for longer. We're actually going to enter into that environment. What does that mean for companies? What does that mean for how they finance themselves, of course, interest costs, but also refinancing costs?
Price index, which everybody's staring at. It makes them more confident about business conditions, make them more confident about refinancing costs. And so I think generally it builds on the optimism that we saw coming into this year.
So does that imply that maybe we aren't going to see that big wave of defaults as, you know, some were predicting this time last year?
I think so. I mean, when you look at the amount of speculative grade
of AlixPartners, because on the consulting front, of course, you compete with the likes of McKinsey, Bain, EY, and they're going through layoffs. They're talking about restructuring, et cetera. Are those conversations happening at AlixPartners in this environment? Appreciate your time on this Friday. That, of course, is Simon Freakley of AlixPartners. Let's get a broader check on the equity markets right now, and we're going to do that with Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle. Worst weekly performance for Bitcoin of 2024. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle. Thank you so much. Now coming up, former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers. He's criticized. All right, it's time now for Wall Street Week Daily, and today we're reading into the Fed's messaging on rate cuts. Wall Street Week host David Weston spoke with former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers to get his thoughts. And that was Wall Street host David Weston speaking to Larry Summers, former U.S. Treasury Secretary. And tonight on Wall Street Week, we'll hear from Kristen Roth de Clark, Barclays Global Head of Tech. All right, it's my favorite part of the week because it's time now for ETF Friday. And today we're looking at ETF derivatives. Joining me now, I'm thrilled to say we have Eric Balchunas. He is Bloomberg Intelligence Senior ETF Analyst. He's got his microphone and everything. And Eric, let's talk about ETF launches because January was insane. February, a little bit more muted, but still pretty brisk, I would say. Talk me through what we're seeing there.
Yeah, I know, like the big
weekend. That, of course, is Bloomberg Intelligence's Eric Balchunas. And of course, you can catch me, Eric, and Scarlett Fu every Monday on ETF. Joins Bloomberg Technology with Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow next. But that does it for us. Have a great weekend. This is Bloomberg.